This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
The Alien and Sedition Act
is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
3 years ago, E. Patrick Johnson published a groundbreaking ethnographic study of black gay men in the South. The name of that book was Sweet Tea. 3 years later, he's traveling the country with a new one-man show based on that book, appropriately called Pouring Tea. E. Patrick Johnson joins us this week to talk about pouring tea and the dynamics of studying black gay men in the South. And later we're joined by Honoreé Fanonne Jeffers, poet, commentator, satirist, whatever you'd like to call her, as she talks about her Phillis Wheatley project. And she asks the question that we're all asking: who's afraid of post-blackness? This is Left of Black, and I'm Mark Anthony Neal. Welcome to Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, your host, and we're joined this afternoon by E. Patrick Johnson, Professor of Performance Studies and African American Studies at Northwestern University. How are you doing today, E. Patrick?
I'm doing great, thanks.
E. Patrick, thanks. E. Patrick Johnson is also the author of Appropriating Blackness, Performance and the Politics of Authenticity. That's Duke University Press, 2003. And also the author of Sweet Tea, Black Gay Men of the South and Oral History. That's University of North Carolina Press, 2008. And E. Patrick Johnson is currently touring with a play that is based on your book, Sweet Tea, Pouring Tea, Black Gay Men in the South Tell Their Tales. It's now at the Signature Theater in Arlington, Virginia. And the Washington Post says of Pouring Tea, many of its monologues brim with emotion, with a powerful sense of witness. We're so happy to have you on the show today, E. Patrick.
Great to be here.
So tell me, the book has been out for 3 years now, and the book, itself is an amazing collection of black gay men that you've talked to in the South. You yourself, of course, are from Hickory, North Carolina.
I am.
A small little town in North Carolina. And so there is kind of a personal connection here, because this is, in some ways, this is the broader narrative of you growing up and dealing with your own sexuality, in a small town like Hickory and of course, more broadly in the American South. Talk a little bit about the process of thinking about putting the book together initially.
Well, it's interesting because the idea for the book actually started here in Washington, D.C. About 15 years ago, when I was attending an event sponsored by Us Helping Us, People Into Living Incorporated, which is a black gay HIV/AIDS outreach group. And they were having a cookout that summer, and I was in attendance, and about 3 feet away from me were a group of older black gay men talking about growing up in the South back in the day. And I was just fascinated by these stories because I had never heard them and I had never read them anywhere. And it struck me that this particular history, had not been chronicled by anyone. So being a newly minted PhD and just gotten my first tenure track position, I said, one day I'm going to go back to the South and collect these stories. And then fast forward to 2004, I was on leave from Northwestern, came back to the South, and started collecting these stories. Started out with just a few men, about 20, and then I ended up interviewing 77 men. The youngest was 19. The oldest at the time was 93. He's now 99, or will be 99 in November. And it was quite a journey. It was a humbling experience for me as well, to have these men open up their lives, their homes, and their hearts to me to share their stories. And the impact has just been overwhelming.
Our colleagues in anthropology, you know, when they talk about ethnographies of this nature, they often refer to their interviewees as informants, you know, given that there's almost kind of undercover sense. That, of course, that's not quite what we get in Sweet Tea. You know, what we get is really a community of folks, you know, who may or may not have connection to each other, but of course are connected by this broader history. How responsive were some of the men that you talked to about opening up about their own experiences, with the knowledge, of course, that, you know, many of these experiences would be shared with a much broader audience?
You know, I was really struck by how open a lot of these men were. Now, of course, some of them wanted to remain anonymous because of their own personal situation in their communities, or for a number of different reasons. Some of their reasons for wanting to remain anonymous weren't just because they were closeted or down low, or whatever nomenclature you want to give them. They had their own reasons, but I was really amazed at how open and forthcoming a lot of these men were. And one of the things that the book, well, I shouldn't say the book, but the process did for me, it dispelled a lot of preconceived notions I had about being Black and gay in the South. Because one of the things I discovered is there are many different Souths. You know, growing up in Eastern Texas is not quite the same as growing up in Alabama, which is not quite the same as growing up in Northern Virginia. So while the theme of being gay and Southern and Black cut across all of these stories, the specificities of these stories were unique to the region. And one of the really interesting things that I discovered is that not all Black people are Baptist, Methodist, and Kojic. So I had some folks that were Lutheran and some Presbyterian. I didn't know that we're Black Presbyterian. So that was a shock to me. But along with a number of other things that really dispelled myths that I had going into the process as well.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined this afternoon by Professor E. Patrick Johnson, author of the book Sweet Tea, Black Gay Men in the South, an Oral History. That's University of North Carolina Press, 2008. And currently touring a national tour with the play Pouring Tea, Black Gay Men in the South Tell Their Story, Tell Their Tales, which is based on Sweet Tea. Talk a little bit about this metaphor of sweet tea. You know, we're here in North Carolina, and you know, when I moved to the region about 7 years ago, I recognized that, you know, sweet tea essentially is the water of the region. You ask for a glass of water, you know, you go to a restaurant in New York, in North Carolina, you just ask for some sweet tea.
Right.
Talk about that metaphor in terms of framing the book.
Right. So, as you just suggested, sweet tea is a staple drink of the South. I call it diabetes in a glass. That's if it's made correctly. But tea in the gay community means gossip. So I'm playing off of that notion of tea being gossip, the story, you know, spill the tea, pour the tea, what's the tea? But also the notion that Southerners like to use euphemisms for just about everything. So one of the euphemisms that is used for gay is someone's sweet. Oh, you know, he has a little sugar in his blood, a little sugar in his tank. So all of those things about, you know, the drink, sweet tea, tea being gossip, and some of the euphemisms for being gay are all went into my thinking around the title for the book.
Now, many of the characters, I mean, they really do come off the page in the book as characters, are very colorful, dramatic, and very interesting stories. And so the book seemed very natural for this transition to the stage play, Pouring Tea. And of course, it's performed as a one-man monologue. You kind of, you know, channeling all these interesting and wonderful characters, you know, for the audiences. What was it like for you, you know, as someone who spent a lot of time with many of these men, getting their stories, trying to translate them in this other form?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Mark. When I first started conducting the interviews, I actually didn't have a performance in mind at all. My idea was just to get the archive of these stories down. But about a year into the process of conducting the interviews, I met so many wonderful storytellers. And one of the things that struck me is that the page wouldn't necessarily give you some of the nuanced ways in which people speak, the you knows, the ums, the nonverbals, all of those things wouldn't necessarily translate on the page, mostly because the publisher is really concerned about word count.
Right.
And the first version of Sweet Tea as a manuscript was 1,000 manuscript pages. And so I had to go in and judiciously edit a number of the things that makes Southern speech so unique, and some of the things that made the way some of these men speak unique. So then I decided, well, I think that these stories should be performed to give people a sense of how these men talk, the way they tell their stories. And what I didn't realize at that time is whether or not I would perform the stories or if I would direct others telling the stories. And because I'm a horrible director, I really do stay in my lane when it comes to that. But I am a performer. I decided, well, wouldn't it be interesting to stage these performances? And what I really had in mind was there was an intellectual question driving the performance, and that's what are the ethics of a researcher re-performing these stories in the absence of these men. And so Pouring Tea, which is more the stage reading version of the show, was more about engaging a conversation about the ethics of oral history, of ethnography, and about advocacy. What does it mean to speak on behalf of others who are not there to speak for themselves? So I started performing the stories 2 years before the book was out, mostly at college campuses around the country. And I still am performing, the stage reading version of the show. But then Jane Sachs, who is the executive director of the Ellen Stone Bellick Institute for the Study of Women and Gender in Arts and Media at Columbia College, saw the show, the stage reading of the show, and started talking to me about becoming an artistic fellow at her institute to develop it into a theatrical production.
And this is at Columbia College in Chicago, right?
Yes. And I was like, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that. And so I became a fellow and started workshopping the piece with other artists, directors, musicians. And then Jane signed on to produce the show. And so last year in Chicago at About Face Theater, in conjunction with Jane and the Institute, we did the world premiere of the show. And it was interesting because one of the things that Jane and all the other artists that I work with said that I must do is get off that music stand, get off the stool,
get away from it, right?
Get rid of the music. And also tell my story. Because they said what was interesting was my relationship to these men. And I went kicking and screaming. I was like, oh, I've already done my story. In my other one-man show, Strange Fruit, I felt that I told my story. But I included some of my stories and the challenges I had growing up being Black and gay. And then in this version here at Signature, part of the national tour, it's even deeper. The show is framed by my personal journey to tell my truth. And it is true that by listening to these other men tell their stories, it's given me the courage to tell all of my story. Because even in the Chicago version, my stories were included, but I hadn't gone deep enough. There were some things that I hadn't wrestled with on a personal level that I wrestle with in this version of the story. And so my personal journey is what frames Sweet Tea at Signature.
We're here with E. Patrick Johnson, who's a professor of performance studies and African American studies at Northwestern University. His play, national play, is currently touring, Pouring Tea, Black Gay Men of the South Tell Their Tales. We're academics, E. Patrick, and so we spend a lot of time and write a lot of words, and there's always the expectation that very few people are going to read them. Part of the brilliance of Sweet Tea is that it really does lend itself to a much broader audience than we have in traditional academics. But of course, now with Pouring Tea, it allows you to reach a much wider audience that you would have normally have, been able to reach out had it simply remained in its manuscript form. What has been the response of audiences to Pouring Tea? And I'm particularly interested in, what has been the response of Black audiences. Even in 2011, coming out narratives of any still, in many African American minds reside as kind of dirty laundry narratives. And so what does it mean to really acknowledge how widespread, our community is and diverse it is in terms of sexuality, and what has been the response of some of those audiences?
Well, Mark, that's been the most rewarding thing about doing this performance is the response from all kinds of people, and not just Black folk, straight white people who've come to see the show. I've been really sort of tracking responses from people and journal about it, because I think I'm going to write something about this experience and people's responses to the show. And one of the interesting things is people who see, the title of the show and they don't fit in any of those categories. They're not Black, they're not gay, they're not from the South. And so they go, well, I don't know if this show is for me. And then they come to the show and then they're moved by it. Something strikes a chord in them on some visceral level. Because I think what people discover is that although you might not be Black, you might not be gay, you might not be from the South, these are also human stories. So some of the themes that run throughout these men's stories are wanting to be loved. And that's something that we all struggle with, wanting to please our parents, wanting to be the perfect son, the perfect daughter, dealing with our spirituality, even if it's not trying to reconcile our sexuality with our spirituality, some of us still wrestle with other parts of ourselves in terms of our spirituality. So these things strike a chord. Specifically with the Black response to the show, it's been overwhelmingly positive. And one of the things that people have said to me, especially straight Black people who come to see the show, they'll go, I know these people. I grew up with such and such, That was just like, what's his name that lived down the street from us and everybody knew he was that way, or he was funny, or, whatever the euphemism of the day. So it's about bringing people together across these identity categories, because we do know these people. We have grown up with them in our communities. And for some of these folks, their journey has not been easy, because they were ostracized in their communities or had a hard time. They were bullied. But in other instances, and this was a surprise to me in conducting the interviews, it was in the smaller towns where people live, where they were the most flamboyant, where they were the most accepted. That was really interesting to me as a researcher, to see how people who are really living inside their own truth were really integrated into their communities. And that, to me, spoke to some class issues as well, for folk who they're integrated into a part of the community because they're needed. One example is Chaz, who's a transgender person from my hometown of Hickory, who's a hairdresser and does everybody's hair and does it, fiercely. And no one bothers Chaz. They accept Chaz for who Chaz is as a transgender person. And that was really striking to me, especially when I, went to church and saw Chaz as a man singing in the choir, and my mother's in my mother's choir, and then on that Monday saw Chastity doing hair.
Right, doing hair.
Salon, and no one, batted an eye.
We're here with E. Patrick Johnson, whose play, Pouring Tea, Black Gay Men in the South Tell Their Tales, runs at the Signature Theater in Arlington, Virginia until October the 9th. Where next for the play after the DC area?
We're looking at a number of places. We don't have any theaters confirmed yet, but we would like to go to Atlanta. That would be a great venue for the show, and we'd like to touch the West Coast, take the tea out there with those children, and eventually end up in New York.
What's next for you, E. Patrick? What are you working on these days when you're not traveling the country, performing Pouring Tea?
Oh, I have a number of projects going on. One of the ones that I'm working on with my co-editor, Ramon Rivera-Severa, is a book called Solo Black Woman. And that is an anthology of essays, scripts, and interviews with Black women solo performance artists. Okay. We got a big grant from the Mellon Foundation to do that project. So it's been really rewarding to have people come bring their work to Northwestern and share that with us. And so that's been exciting. And I'm actually going to, I just decided this year, do part 2 to Sweet Tea, and go back and interview Black lesbians of the South. Wow.
Those are both, sound like amazing projects, as both Sweet Tea and Pouring Tea are amazing projects. We've been joined this afternoon by E. Patrick Johnson, who's a professor of performance studies and African and Afro-American studies at Northwestern, author of Appropriating Blackness, Performance in the Politics of Authenticity, that's Duke University Press, 2003. Sweet Tea, Black Gay Men of the South, and Oral History, that's the University of North Carolina Press, 2008, and currently touring the country with Pouring Tea, Black Gay Men of the South Tell Their Tales. It's been a pleasure to have you on, E. Patrick.
It's been great to be with you, Mark.
Thank you, and take care.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Mothering number 1. She who gave birth to the poet, someplace in Africa, circa 1761. And there's an epigraph from Phillis Wheatley on being brought from Africa to America. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand. Mercy, child, what a mother might have said, pointing at the sun rising, what makes life possible? Then drip the bowl of water reverent into oblivious earth. Was this prayer for her? Respect for the dead or disappeared, an act to please a genius child? Her little girl could speak only of water, bowl, sun, light arriving, light gone, sometime after the nice white lady paid and named her for the slave ship. Mercy, what Phillis claimed after that sea journey. Let's call it that. Let's lie to each other. Not early descent into madness, naked travail among filth and rats. What got Phillis over the sea? What kept a stolen daughter? Perhaps it was mercy, dear reader. Mercy, dear brethren. Water, bowl, sun, a mothering, God's milky sound, morning shards, and she wondered if her child forgot her real name, refused to envision the rest. Baby teeth missing, and somebody wrapping her treasure, barely, in a dirty carpet. 'Twas mercy. You know the story, how we've lied to each other.
Welcome back to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. And if you are at all on social media, Facebook or Twitter, and you are privileged to be following or friend with Honoreé Fanonne Jeffers, you know how much of an extraordinary treat that is. Arguably one of the most sassy figures and most creative and brilliant figures on contemporary Black social media. It is quite an honor to have you finally here, Honoreé, on Left of Black. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, and I am thrilled to be here. And you were always so nice, which is why everybody loves you, bro, man. I'm just so happy to finally be on Left of Black. I love this show. It's fabulous.
Thank you. And let me just say, your sass is palpable, on Twitter and Facebook, but in person, it's literally like, bounding out of the screen.
And I also have a very deep Southern accent, which I am not aware of. But everyone else seems to think I have a Southern accent, so probably that's a little jarring too.
For those of you who don't know Honoreé Jeffers, she's the author of several books of poetry, The Gospel of Barbecue, Outlandish Blues, and most recently, Red Clay Suite. She is the founder of the website Phillis Remastered. And of course, one of the things that you're working on now is a Phillis Wheatley poetry project. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now.
Well, I started this project about 5 years ago. It's taken about 5 years. I'm nearly about 3/4 of the way through. But I started, just like a lot of Black intellectuals, I encountered Phillis Wheatley's poetry when I was in, for the second time when I was in college.
Okay.
For the first time through my father, who was a Black Arts Movement poet. And I wasn't I have to be honest, I'm always, you know me, straight no chaser. I was not very impressed with the poetry. I thought it was stilted. And, then I encountered it again in college, and my English professors would have us read her because we had to, because she was an African American first.
Right.
And,
right.
And I would encounter her throughout the years. And then when I, probably about 8 years ago now, Henry Louis Gates Jr. had an article in the New Yorker about Phillis Wheatley, which was an excerpt from his book, which of course, now that I'm on camera, completely escapes my mind. But it was about, all I remember was there was this huge picture of Dr. Gates and this little teeny picture of Phillis Wheatley. And so but what I found really interesting was that he started talking about the Enlightenment philosophers, Immanuel Kant, David Hume, and a lot of people don't view Thomas Jefferson as a philosopher, but he actually was, put forth some philosophy in notes of on the state of Virginia. So he starts, Dr. Gates starts breaking down Enlightenment philosophy and talking about Phillis Wheatley. I don't know if I should be gesturing with my hands. Talking about Phillis Wheatley in the context of Enlightenment philosophy, which basically stated that Black people were one step above animals. And I just found that really interesting. And so I've always been a closet historian. That's what a lot of people don't know. So I got the book in hardback immediately when it came out. And that was it was a little teenagey book, but it was like $20 or something like that. And I devoured it in one setting. And I started becoming very interested again in Phillis Wheatley, So I went back and I started reading secondary sources on her. Of course, there's the David Shields book. There's William H. Robinson, who is, basically considered the Phillis Wheatley scholar until you come up to someone like Vincent Coretta with the complete writings of Phillis Wheatley. So I just start reading everything I can because I get obsessive like that, right? I'll decide I'm on a subject and then I'll just read, every book I can find. So all of that led me to this one genius book by Catherine Clay Bassard. called Spiritual Interrogations. And I can't remember what's after the colon, but, and it's about early Black women writers' spiritual utterance. And my work is very much about, like, spirituality runs through all of my work. And I read that book and it rocked my world. She starts placing Phillis Wheatley in this context of women that are talking back to slavery. And I was like, really? Really? So I go, Mark, and I go back and I read that most famous poem that upsets us all on being brought from Africa to America. And you know, that little 8-line poem, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too." And all of a sudden, just like that, I thought, what if that mercy is not her thanking white folks for capturing her into slavery, but gratitude to God?
Yeah. Right.
For bringing her through the Middle Passage.
Yeah.
And I got chills. I started weeping. And I thought, I got to write about this woman because they need to understand her. You know, we need to know that this was not like some Aunt Thomasina, as my mother says, you know, the female counterpart of Uncle Tom. So I decide I'm going to write 3 poems about that point. Then I decide I'm gonna write a couple more poems. And so I decided I was gonna write a group of poems. I was writing some, you know, just poems that didn't fit anywhere. Yeah. And I thought, well, I'll take a section of this book that I'm working on and I'll write these Phillis Wheatley poems. So I wrote a proposal, and I didn't really understand how bold I was. I wrote a proposal to go to the American Antiquarian Society so that I could do research on Phillis Wheatley. Well, you know, at the time, I did not understand this was a world-renowned.
Right.
I had no idea. And as a matter of fact, I had applied for another fellowship that I didn't get, and I was swole. You know, because this was like a year-long fellowship that was going to give me like thousands and thousands of dollars, and I could take off from work. And I got this little fellowship to American Antiquarian Society, and all I got was $1,100 and a place to stay. I was swole, you know. I was like, I don't want this little bitty fellowship and blah, 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 blah. And I get there, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God. This is like, you know, I mean, there were people from Milan, there were, you know.
Yeah.
And I found out like 3,000 people had applied for this one fellowship that I had received.
Right.
And I started doing research, and within, I say about 3 or 4 days, I realized that everything that we thought we knew about Phillis Wheatley, that we took for granted
that we didn't know
about Phillis Wheatley.
Yeah. Yeah.
Comes from one undocumented source by a woman that has never been proved to have a connection to the to the Wheatleys, the people who bought Phillis Wheatley. That's all we knew.
That's incredible.
And I thought, why would we take somebody's undocumented word? Well, of course we know why. She was a white lady. Let's keep it real. Do you think they would have taken a Negro's undocumented word and not been like, okay, well, you know, let's double check what this Negro has to say about Phillis Wheatley, right? But this lady, they took her word, and every Phillis Wheatley scholar takes this woman's word. But I start doing research, and I can't find a connection between this woman, Margaretta Matilda Odell. I could not. Now, Vincent Coretta's book is coming out. His biography of Phillis Wheatley is coming out in November.
Okay.
So I would be very interested to see what he does. But I could not find anything. But I tell you what I did find. I found Phillis Wheatley's husband alive on the 1790 census of Boston. Okay. The same man that Margaretta Matilda Odell said abandoned her and moved further south.
Okay.
And I found a petition that he made to the Massachusetts legislature the year after Phillis Wheatley died. So he was straight up in Boston. Now, whether or not they were together when she died in 1784 is up for grabs.
Yeah.
It's another story. So I started finding these sort of things about her, and then I fell in love with her. And then I just decided it couldn't just be a group of poems; it had to be a whole book. and the problem is, though, letting her go. You know, I've been with her for 5 years, and it's very emotional. But I have to let her go. So I'm going to Africa in a few months, to Senegal, to Gorée Island. Shoring up my courage. I know that is going to be very traumatizing, but I figure if she can withstand it, I can. You know, I'm going on the plane, staying in a hotel. I'm not in the bottom of a boat, you know, lying in my own mess and lice and rats and all of that. So I figure I got to get myself together. I owe that to her. I owe it to her to go back there.
You're watching Left of Black. We're joined by Honoreé Jeffers, poet supreme, author of several books of poetry, including the most recent, Red Clay Suite. Also a professor of English at the University of Oklahoma. We're also the coordinator of the Creative Writing Program there. Let me ask you this, Honoreé. Your blog, Phillis Remastered, is really a very interesting and provocative site, and it really allows you to kind of comment on a range of things from the spirit of Phillis Wheatley, if that, you know, strikes you as kind of the right chord. And I've been struck by one of the pieces that you did a few weeks ago. We have a common Twitter follower, Touré, of course, who has written a new book on post-race. Who's afraid of post-race? Or post-blackness, excuse me. And he had done a piece a few weeks ago on Michael Vick, you know, wondering aloud, what if Michael Vick was white? And you raised an interesting question in critique, you know, what if Touré was white? This idea that, you know, are there in fact African-American thinkers that we give a tremendous amount of latitude to because they are African-American thinkers, that we would never give that latitude if they were folks not from the hood, from the community, if you will? I just, well, first of all, let me say I was, I mean, as I said in the piece, I was on, I think it was James Braxton Peterson's Facebook page. And I think he was the one that had posted the whole thing, the piece that Touré did on Michael Vick. Yeah.
And I'm not a sports fan in the least. So, I mean, you know, I just can't work out on my elliptical. And so when I saw this thing about football, I was like, ooh, this is so boy. And you know, I am a radical feminist, but I'm a Southern, you know, radical feminist. So there's a little, you know, difference. So I was like, ooh, this is real boy. And they were all like, you know, all the guys were on there. And I was like, this is completely boring. But I saw this picture of Michael Vick in whiteface, which was bizarre and extremely disturbing. And so I thought, well, why don't I go over there and check it out? Check out this piece that Touré wrote. And let me say, as I said in the piece, I don't even like Michael Vick. He tortured them poor animals. You know what I'm saying? I just don't like him. I don't care that he said he was sorry. You know, I'm just like, that was just horrible. Although, you know, he paid his debt to society. Right. And so, you know, I can move on. I'm not his judge. God is his judge. Right. But I was, you know, I'm not even a fan of his. But when I saw what Touré said about him, I was deeply troubled. And as I said to somebody, you know, I used to hang with boys back in the day, which probably is why I'm so tough. You know, I'm a girl, I you know, who can act like a guy and then I can go girl again, and you know, I contain multitudes like Whitman.
Yeah.
But so because I hung with boys back in the day, I was like, this violates the black man code. You know, he went into that guy's family background to mine territory about culture, you know, black culture. But in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, he wasn't talking to us. He wasn't talking to black folks.
Right.
He was talking to white folks.
Right.
And he was using us and Michael Vick's pain as a child as currency to gain favor with the white audience to say, look, I know black people, you know. And I was very troubled by that. And even though I don't like Michael Vick, I could only wonder, like, how he must have felt for the fact, you know, for somebody bringing up his daddy not being in the household. What that's that's below the belt.
Yeah, right.
And then, you know, the whole thing where he was talking about 70% of black children are born in out of wedlock households. And let me just take a tangent. As you know, bruh man, I am known for my tangents. Why is it, okay, look, yes, I'm very traditional. I feel like the best family is, you know, two married people, whether those are two gay people, two straight people, but two married
adults,
people.
right? Two adults committed to each other, right? Yeah.
Right, two adults committed to each other, raising children. But guess what? It don't always go that way. We in the black community are known for negotiating,
absolutely,
you know, family dynamics. Why does everybody assume that just because folks ain't married, your daddy ain't in the house?
Right, right.
That's rude.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I got relatives right now been in committed loving relationships and ain't jumped the broom because of tax purposes or whatever. You know what I'm saying? They living together, they raising their kids. He bringing his paycheck home, signing it over to her, and I'm just like, okay, that's rude.
I mean, because what you're
that's my.
I mean, basically, what you're suggesting is that, you know, those numbers never capture the quality of the relationships. You know, all they are numbers, right? And they get exploited for just that reason. Yeah.
They never have. And as you know, I am also very big on manners. Very big on me. I do not cuss online. I cuss like a sailor on crack with my friends, but I don't cuss online. And I just feel like there's certain things, you know, you got to learn how to do stuff in a polite way. And that wasn't polite, and it was not kind what he did to Michael Vick, and it made me mad. And then I started thinking about how he was using these sort of ways of interpreting blackness to instantly connect to pathology.
Right.
And that goes all the way back to the Enlightenment period. So I just decided, and the funny thing is, everybody's like, all the guys, I love that piece you did on Michael Vick. They don't read nothing else on my blog, but they're like, girl, you did that. You dropped that mic when you did it, you know. But I didn't really think it was really that deep. Frankly, I felt like anyone who had a modicum of historical knowledge, you know, if frankly, I think, okay, oh Lord, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna say it. I think Touré is out of his league with this whole post-black theory. I just don't think that he has done the background reading. I think that this is, you know, this is something that's cute, but, you know, I don't see anything that indicates a deep body of knowledge. You know, it's like he knows contemporary and he even knows late modern. But modern is not just the 20th century,
right? You
know? And so I keep trying to, and it was Randall Kennedy. He broke it down. He, you know, when he broke it down, and you know, that's the thing. And I also feel like sometimes when I'm listening to Touré, I do wonder, like, I don't have, I'm a serious critic of things that I see in the Black community, as you know.
Yeah.
As you know, again, rapper who shall not be named. Okay. But I feel like you have to be deeply committed to the Black community to make those deep critiques. You got, I love Black men strong, and to, paraphrase Walter Mosley and always outnumbered, always outgunned. I am one of those Black women that will kick a Black man in the behind when he's doing wrong and kiss him on the head when he's doing right. I'm committed to the Black community, whoever I'm dating at the time or whatever. And that's why I feel comfortable saying certain things. But I don't know Touré personally, so I don't want to morally indict him. I've never met him, but I do get the feeling that he's not really deeply committed to the community. He's deeply committed to Touré. And, so that's what concerned me about, and that's why I had to talk about what he did with Michael Vick and to sort of place it in its historical context.
We have Honoreé Fanonne Jeffers.
Am I in trouble?
on Who's Really Afraid of Post-Blackness. You're watching Left of Black. And we're joined this afternoon by the always provocative and always sassy and always brilliant Honoreé Fanonne Jeffers. The first time I came in contact with your work, Honoreé, it must have been more than a decade ago, and it would have been a very rough cut of Aisha Shahida Simmons' groundbreaking film, No. And you read your work. And I remember watching you then and going, oh my Lord, who is this woman? Because just your energy and your sass and the way that you were educating, but at the same time offering a smackdown, was really, in my mind, quite brilliant. So I remember when I finally friended you on Facebook, 2 years ago, and it's like, oh my God, I'm friends with Honoreé Jeffers.
Oh, whatever. I was the same way. I was like, oh my God, Mark Anthony Neal. And of course, friending on Facebook, I mean, who can have 3,000 friends or 1,300 friends or 500 friends? But I remember when we first had that conversation online, and I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to Mark Anthony Neal.
But given your work with No, and your work around addressing sexual violence against Black women in general, what's your take on SlutWalk?
Well, let me say that I am a rape survivor and I am a molestation survivor. And one of the reasons that, I am glad when people say I'm sassy and, I have a great personality, because this is the face of a sexual assault survivor.
Right.
Someone who does survive and thrive. So that's one of the things that I loved about No. It was a great film that was presenting the full spectrum of Black women who were survivors. SlutWalk, I think, is extremely courageous. And I gotta say, I'm glad that there are women who are doing SlutWalk. My issue is I'm a Southern woman. And even though I'm a radical feminist, with all that entails, I still am very ladylike in public, So calling myself slut, I just can't get past it. And I'm thinking about writing about it, because I do think that at a certain point, you do have to grapple with your issues of respectability. What constitutes respectable sexuality, and you have to sometimes transgress respectability in order to get your point known, over. And Aisha is one of my dearest friends in the world. And I remember when I was, I remember that historic and loving weekend. I believe it was in 1999 that I flew up to Philadelphia. Salmisha Tillett was in the film. And you know, several other people. And Salmisha was just a girl.
Yeah.
So to see her as the brilliant, you know, scholar that she is now with the degree from Harvard and all of that, it's just like, it just blows my mind, you know. But she and her sister, both of them, you knew they were special. Yeah. But I remember when I was about to fly up, and my mother and I, you know, my mother is my entire world, and I was living in Talladega, teaching at Talladega College at the time. And so every time my mother just retired from Talladega, so every time I left town, I say, well, Mama, I'm going here, I'm going here. So I got ready to go to Philadelphia, and I didn't tell her where I was going. And she, you know, Mama's nosy, as mothers have a right to be. And she said, well, why are you going? And when I told her, she said, are you sure you want to be associated with that kind of project? You know, you're not worried about how people will view you? Yeah. And, you know, because my mother's a Spelmanite. With all that entails, okay? My mother went to Spelman, where you could not leave the grounds without hat, bag, and gloves and chaperone. Okay. So my mother is very much a Southern lady with all that entails, as well as a radical feminist. So I was sort of disturbed that she said that, and that was back when I was very, very young, and I was like, this is important, and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, all right, you know, whatever. And I remember when I went up there and I did the film, the first take, there's a picture of me, a still that Aisha took of me standing on the steps of this house that we were filming at. And once I finished, I burst into tears. And I didn't even know all that pain was there. And then it was like a ricochet effect, and every woman in the house just started crying. Wow. And I think about, you know, we transgressed at that time. Aisha was our leader. Yeah. And SlutWalk is transgressing now. Yeah. And they need to be doing that, and I'm glad they're doing it. And you know, and I'm hoping one day that I can, you know, I can get there to that moment where slut doesn't mean, you know, what it means to my heart. Yeah. Which is, you know, you're a bad girl. Yeah. You know, you're a bad girl. But you know, I was telling people I live out here in Oklahoma City, and there's a dance set that I was going to. And I would come, and I would always be dressed respectably, quote unquote, you know, in my nice lady. There would be some ladies, you know, working it. But, you know, I just can't get down like that. And I was getting grabbed. I got my booty grabbed 3 times in my conservative outfit. Right. So I think, you know, the transgression is necessary. And there's necessary for bold people to do things that some of us who are scared, right. You know, we need them to do that, or conservative, or what have you. Right.
You're watching Left of Black. We've been joined this afternoon by Honoreé Fanonne Jeffers, poet extraordinaire, thinker extraordinaire, one of the great and wonderful lights in contemporary Black social media. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, Honoreé.
Thank you so much. I had a ball.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.